Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and we are so pleased that you have found us on Crime Time here on A Mighty Blaze, where we are every Tuesday at 4 p.m. bringing you another wonderful crime fiction author and a book that we hope you will read. And today it is The Taken Ones by the fabulous Jess Lourey, and more on the fabulous Jess in a moment. I am your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 14 novels of suspense. Ooh, going on 15. Look at this. Just arrived here. Shay Ryan, I think I can do this. Maybe One Wrong Word comes out in February, and I am so pleased about that, about lies and gossip and revenge and how one wrong word can ruin your life. But today we are here to talk about The Taken Ones by Jess Lourey, which is so atmospheric and so cinematic and so creepy and so haunting and so riveting. I cannot wait for you to hear all about it. Let me tell you what Jeffrey Deaver said about The Taken Ones. Lourey brings her formidable storytelling talent to the game, and on top of that, wows us with a deft stylistic touch. This is a one-sitting read, says Jeffrey Deaver. I do agree. Welcome to you all. I see Daniel is here, and so many people, and Lynn is here saying hi, ladies. And this is great. Leslie Lloyd. That's really Leslie Lloyd. Is Daniel McBreakneck is Leslie Lloyd? We don't know. This is complicated. This is anyway, not very complicated. Is that this is absolutely a marvelous book, and I agree with Jeffrey Deaver, as I always do, about your style. And the other thing that it is, Kim, an awesome blurb, hey Sharon, is this book from page one is total immersion storytelling.
Thank you.
How much do you think about and craft the openings of your novels?
When I first write it, I don't think too much about it, but when I go back, I spend so much time on it because in those first few pages is when we either catch our reader or we release them, and I want to hook them. I want to really pull them in. How about you? Do you front load your book, or do you just?
I try to make my beginnings compel the reader to find out what happens next. I try to put a question or a mystery or a story or a concept that people think, ooh, I can't wait to find out what happens. I wonder what that really means. I wonder what they're really doing. But what you do with this, and thank you for that, and what I try to do so very carefully is to make everything very clear about who these people are and where they are and what they want. Or what they think they want at that moment, because I don't want to lose them by confusing them. So talk a little bit about that, how you really set a scene. And this is a dual timeline. So you really set a scene for this.
Yeah. And so if I'm writing a dark book, and The Taken Ones is a dark book, I first start by watching horror movies.
You do.
I do, set in the era that I'm writing. And so that opening scene in The Taken Ones is set in the 80s. And so I just watched so much 80s horror, and so you get a feel for at the opening of the book, they're walking into the woods, and so sort of that 80s lighting and the 80s clothes and the 80s conversation, the 80s candy, but just that very cinematic sense of beneath it all, there's dread, right? So I'm just immersed in that dread. And there's this great tip from Lee Child. I saw him present once, and he said, in his books, he's got the great big mystery. I mean, it's what everybody's trying to solve, what Jack Reacher's trying to solve. But he also puts a tiny little mystery, a little loop that the reader doesn't even notice, but the back of their mind they want to close, like a joke without a punchline or an unopened letter. And so in addition to making it atmospheric, in addition to setting the major mystery, I try to sneak a little one in there just so the reader wants to close the loop.
That is the essence of psychological suspense, isn't it? It's not just psychological among the characters, but between the author and the readers. You're trying to understand what your readers expect, what they hope for, what they will latch onto a little bit.
Exactly. And it's a little manipulative, but I'm still doing it.
Manipulative, but we love it. We embrace it. We completely look for this. Hey, Sharon says, hi from Minnesota.
Oh,
I read and it is amazing. We are talking about The Taken Ones by Jess Lourey. Also, the three children going into the woods is such a classic fairy tale opening. How many times and we know what must be lurking in the woods. So as you're talking about that sense of dread that pervades that throughout, we're just waiting to see what's going to happen, but we don't know who to.
Right. And I thank you for picking up on that fairy tale vibe, because I also read so many fairy tales to write this book, because the original Grimm Brothers fairy tales are so dark. They're very dark. They're very violent. They're not kid stories. And so I read a bunch of those to get ideas on how to set up this basically the stage where children experience their worst nightmares. And in this case, only one of them comes out of the woods.
And they're superly innocent, and you've made them adorable, and one a very good sister and one the little sister. I mean, this kind of relationships that we all understand. And so the complete innocence of these girls is going to be covered by this darkness. And the thing and we know that as readers, that's why we keep turning the page.
Yeah, yes. And hopefully, I mean, just like most fairy tales, hopefully if you stick with it, there's positivity at the end, right? But you have to go through the dark forest to get to the lesson. And so it's just how it works.
And we know that because the end of the ending of a fairy tale often is they all lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
Sometimes, not all the time. In the Grimm Brothers fairy tales, sometimes you think they did what? And then and that's the end of the story, but you're supposed to learn something from it. Let me quickly remind you, if you don't know about A Mighty Blaze was started 3 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic by the marvelous powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt to keep us reading, to keep us connecting, to keep our community together, to keep us learning about new books and new authors, and maybe meeting a new favorite author like Jess Lourey today. Let me tell you a little bit about Jess Lourey. She's the Amazon Charts bestselling, Edgar-nominated, ITW Thriller Anthony and Minnesota Book Award winning author of young adult, magical realism, crime fiction, nonfiction, and children's books. She's also an amazing friend and a marvelous person, and a loyal and caring human being. I mean, and hilarious as well.
I am very funny.
It doesn't say that. He's a retired professor of writing and sociology, a recipient of the Lofts Excellent in Teaching Fellowship, a TEDx presenter. We'll have to talk about that because that's the hardest thing I've ever done. About her TEDx talk to discover the surprising inspiration behind Mayday, her first published novel. While she's not leading women's writing retreats, and we'll talk about that, reading, traveling, or fostering kittens, we'll talk about that as well. Lourey is crafting her next story. She lives in Minnesota, where 23 of her books are set, and you can find her at jessicalourey.com. But you know that. One more thing, and then I'll let Jess talk. I promise we are giving away a copy of, well, we're not. Jess is and her publisher are giving away a copy of The Taken Ones, not this one. I'm keeping this. Leave a question or a comment or general approval and applause in the comments, and the wheel of fun will be spinning at the end of this time, and we will pick a winner at random. And the rest of you run, and look, not right now, after the show is over, run, and get The Taken Ones by Jess Lourey, which is just out. So tell us what the story is about, and then we'll talk about what it's really about.
Yeah, right. Isn't that the way? So the story features 2 new agents. It's going to be a series, new to me. Evangeline Van Reed is a cold case agent. She's gut instincts. She's a little bit rogue. She's very messy. And her partner, Harry Steinbeck, is a forensic scientist. He's handsome. He always wears hats, 3-piece suits. He's very well put together. He has all facts. He has all science. And so I was going for that odd couple, Felix and Oscar, which is so generational, right? But you know Felix and Oscar, right? You know who I'm talking about.
There's Holmes and Watson, and they're all. This is a classic combination because it works so gorgeously,
right? Because there's so much inherent conflict between the 2 of them. And so the after the prologue, where the 3 girls go into the woods and then only one comes out, fast forward to 2022, and Van is on the scene of a woman who's been buried alive, and it comes out that might be connected to the 25-year-old case of the missing, the taken ones. And so her and Harry have to sort of solve the case forward to figure out who killed the woman buried alive, but also solve the case backward to crack the cold case.
And I mean, that is marvelous. How can you resist, you all, the Taken Ones? And this, how many layers does this title have? Talk a little bit about that as much as you can.
Yeah, this book it's a hard one to talk about because it's got so many spoilers in it that I just end up sort of making snort noises in a lot of these interviews because I'm not sure exactly how much to say. But we find out about Van's past, Evangeline Van Reed's past, and how she grew up in a pretty traumatic environment. And she, because of it, has hunches that may be visions, maybe just actually clues that only she can see. That help her to solve cases. And she's really intent on saving these girls because nobody saved her. Nobody saved her sisters growing up. So this is her mission throughout the book.
And I love her name. It's sort of, this is the forest primeval. It's such a primal name, and talking, connecting with the girls being missing in the forest and the forest of emotions. And, it's lovely. And then she makes it Van to make it be contemporary, but underneath she's really something else. And then her colleague, Harry, is just so completely different. Talk a little bit about where he came from.
Yeah, so the two of them, Van and Harry, actually started in a short story. And so it was in the middle of COVID, and my publisher, my acquisitions editor at Thomas and Mercer, Jessica Tribble, who I love, she's a queen, reached out to me and she said, "Do you want to write a short story?" And short stories are so hard to write. I don't write. I'd much rather write a book any day of the week, but it was Jessica. So I'm like, okay, I'll write a short story. Because it was the middle of COVID, the theme of the anthology was traveling. And I happened to be in Costa Rica at the time. So pulled up my computer, I'm sitting by the pool. The last thing I want to do is write a short story. But I had kind of an idea of Van, and I kind of wanted her to have a secret. And I knew what I wanted the title of the book, of the short story, to be, which was Catcher in the Lie instead of Catcher in the Rye. And I worked backward from there. And for the first and maybe only time in my life, the whole story just plopped out. It came out. Harry showed up. They had this great sort of oddball chemistry. She had a secret. He had a secret. We're not sure who's got the lie until the very last line of the short story. And so I just really loved that short story, and it did really well. So Jessica circled back and she said, "Hey, do you want to turn it into a series?" And I had chosen to write about, I had made Van and Harry BCA agents because the BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, is unique to Minnesota. And there's about 300 employees. And I'm like, you know what? As long as they don't read it, I can make everything up, right? As long as those 300 people never hear the short story.
One of the things, and I'll go back right to that, but I want to tell you that when I was reading this novel, there's one of the first times the BCA is mentioned. I thought, what is the BCA? And then I turned the page, and there is the explanation of what and I thought, Jess, you have done it again. It absolutely was perfect. So what is it about the BCA? What is that? It is unique.
It is unique. So my understanding, what my research told me, was that in the 1920s, the mobsters from Chicago, your Al Capones, your Babyface Nelsons, would come to Minnesota to vacation and would just tear up the state from St. Paul up to Duluth. And the police were under-equipped to deal with them. So the state legislature's like, we'll put some money aside for a special, basically a mini FBI within Minnesota that will just deal with this. And then it grew, and then it grew. And now they have one of the best forensic labs in the nation. They have a cold case department. They have all sorts of agents on staff who have no jurisdiction. They have to be invited in. So they're sort of like these superheroes who swoop in and then swoop out. And I was just captivated. They do really good work. I was just captivated by what they do.
Have you always known about them, or did you come across them in the research for this novel, or some other answer?
It was some other answer. There's a forensic scientist. Her name is Anne-Marie Gross. She works for the BCA, and she spoke at a Sisters in Crime event here in Minnesota like 8 years ago. So I had in the back of my head that we were home to this wonderful organization. And in fact, I reached out to her to get a lot of information because she knows everything about it. And so, so I knew that I wanted to work them in a future book, and it just landed perfectly.
Do you see this? Sharon says, we have a house about 2 blocks from where Ma Barker used to vacation.
That is such a great sentence. Thank you, Sharon.
I've never quite read anything like that. And there's your next book. There's something for Van and Harry to work on. I mean, I know that you have talked about it, and I've heard you talk about how some of your inspiration comes from your own childhood and your connection with the kinds of violence outside, not in your home, but outside your home, when you were growing up. Do you think what was that, and why do you think, or if was it formative? You can finish that sentence any way you want. You know what I mean? Was it formative for you? Is it haunting to you?
It is absolutely. I'm fascinated by. So to back it up, I grew up in Painesville, Minnesota, which is so well named, right? I know you couldn't get away with that in fiction. And there were a lot of lovely people in Painesville, very small town, population 2,000. But also in the 80s, somebody was abducting boys, and because it was such a small town, we all knew about it. And so 8 boys were abducted and returned. But in the 80s, there really wasn't language to talk about it. So we saw them come back. We knew they were changed. We knew there was a curfew siren. We knew there was danger everywhere, but nobody was talking to us about it. And that culminated in 1989. I was actually in college at that time when Jacob Wetterling was abducted 20 miles from Painesville and never returned. And so in the back of my head, I just always thought about what is the effects of growing up when it feels unsafe, when it feels unsafe to be in the street. And I was never in the center of it, right? I don't mean to claim any territory in there, but just to be on the outside of this always traumatic, terrifying environment. And so I work through that in a lot of my books. What is it like to grow up as a audience to trauma, and how do you respond?
And also when it feels random, that
Yeah.
it might be you or
Right. Right. It might be you, because the people it is, they most of the time did not ask for it, could never have seen it coming, did not deserve it. It really could be anybody.
and it's interesting because there is such an undercurrent of suspense and tension and terror and gloom and darkness. I mean, it's really fun to read you all. It's a page. I don't mean to make it sound horrible. It's lovely and cinematic and gorgeous. But that, if you allow yourself to think about the world that way,
Mhm.
that could be how the world is. I mean, I know sometimes I'll say to my husband when he goes out, I'll say, "Be careful, sweetheart," and he'll say, "Of what?" And I think of all the possible things that could happen to you if you go out, and he doesn't see the world that way. So do you think that's a writerly thing to think?
Yeah, or is it a chicken and the egg? Like we think that way because we're writers, or we became writers because we think that
Yes,
way.
maybe so.
And I
Maybe.
also think in my experience, to overgeneralize, women have to worry a lot more than men when they step outside their door. And so I think that we definitely pay attention. We pay attention to that. And I think in my fiction, it's really important to me to center the victims, right? To center the people who had their lives changed, to show them as complex whole people.
And it's interesting too, because when you think about Van and Harry, and who are in The Taken Ones, the main character of the beginning of this new series, The Taken Ones, Van and Harry each had their own reasons for wanting to be a crime solver, an investigator, a detective, personally and professionally. And that's so well done in this book. Talk a little bit about the personal. I mean, it's sort of how the crime works on the cop rather than how the cop works on the crime.
Yeah, yeah. And so Van really wants to save these girls. She really personally goes through life wanting to save people because nobody saved her. And then also, it's the only job she knows how to do. She was basically raised in a commune. It was led by a very charismatic man, but it was just a very, very dark place. Harry, on the other hand, and his secrets are only alluded to. It's in book two. We find out what Harry is hiding. But as far as we know in book one, he's very invested in just being a scientist and lining everything up, making sure the bad guy's always caught. He's just very dedicated to making 1 + 1 = 2.
And each of them, when they work in tandem, it's such a fabulous mix. But I do think there's this element of something else going on in the novel besides the straightforward Harry and Van. It can sort of be whatever the reader wants it to be. But talk a little bit about the Bendy Man. What a fascinating.
Yeah, I really wanted to go back to that fairy tale theme we were talking about. I really wanted to work in urban legends because I'm fascinated by them, right? 'Cause there's always something at the root of them, some shared fear, some shared experience that you don't have the words to explain. So I'm like, okay, I want to make a really creepy villain who could fit in a fairy tale. And so the Bendy Man came to me, and I honestly thought I had entirely made him up, but I was in Oregon a few weeks ago visiting my aunt, and she brought this game we used to play when we were kids, and inside is this purple Bendy Man, and you bend him and you play charades with him instead of with your body. And I'm like, oh my God, that's where I got the Bendy Man from. So I did not make him up. He's been living in my psyche for 2 decades.
Isn't that, I mean, you make him he's not a purple bendy thing in the first, a scary thing that lurks somewhere in urban legend, like the goat killer that we had in high school, or the hook killer, or whatever it was. But Mia saying, no way, like Gumby. That's, and I was thinking like those blow up things that are in front of car dealerships.
They get big and then they get small. Yeah.
Those are scary enough. Why do you feel it's so? What is the power of an unknown scary thing, though, in sort of the bigger picture? The power of an unknown force that you're not quite sure what is or how to deal with.
Right. For me, it's the same way it works if the violence is not on the page. So my books are very dark, but they're not very violent, because I think that if I can lay the groundwork and you can draw the picture yourself, it's going to be much more terrifying than anything I could supply to you. And so the idea of there being something out there that we can't quite figure out, it speaks to our caveman days, right? Sitting around the fire and we don't know what's going to get us. It's very biological fear.
And your fan Jeffrey Deaver is such a master of that. I remember reading one of his novels, and I don't remember which one it was, that one of the chapters ended with this creepy, scary, clearly bad guy just plugging in an iron, and that was all. And I mean, that's haunted me for 20 years, for goodness sake, because you never see what happens after that. Like, you don't wanna, but that plugging in the iron is enough. And you do that throughout this book. Renee or someone was asking in this, is this a spooky book? And I think that's a great question, because it's a psychological book, but would you call it a spooky book?
Yeah, I think it is more of a psychological book, but when the Bendy Man shows up, it is really creepy. He was so fun to write, but he's also super disturbing.
Nancy says, I love a book that disrupts my bedtime. Did the Bendy Man disrupt your bedtime?
Yeah, he still disrupts my bedtime. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but the way that he works is haunting. It will keep you up. It will keep you up past your bedtime.
So what's it like to write this? I mean, you foster kittens. You're a lovely person. You're charming. You're adorable. You're funny. You're fun. You're a good pal, as I keep saying. And then somewhere in you is this superly dark thing. How is it? Does your posture change when you write? I mean, how do you manifest that?
Right, I lean over, the dowager's hump shows up on my back, and my fingernails grow. Okay. My Scooby-Doo mask comes off. Well, and you and I think we've talked about this when we used to tour and teach, how mystery writers are the nicest people you will meet. And it's because everybody's got darkness. I believe this. Everybody's got the dark and the light. We reach in and we pull it out to the light, and so it doesn't control us. It doesn't decide what we say or how we behave, because we sort of, it's cathartic. We get it out there. So I do watch my horror movies, right? So I get in that mindset, but I find it very cathartic to write these evil, dark things.
And it's also, I guess you could make it either kind of clinical, that you're doing a job to portray a thing, and this is sort of how you have to do it. And also, it's fiction. Yeah. And so it can always be it can be just made up, and then you're trying to make it be as realistic of fiction as there possibly can be. And that said, I do want to talk about Minnesota and your just immersive settings. You can smell the woods, you can hear the crackling of the sticks and the wet leaves and the darkness and the talk a little bit about Minnesota and the setting and what that's like to write and how important it is.
Yeah, and I think we have some wonderful mystery writers in Minnesota. William Kent Kruger, Christy Belcamino, Alan Eskins, John Sanford. I think part of it is the setting, because the weather is so violent here. It's always in conflict. There's not a year that, in my memory, and I've lived here my whole life, where there hasn't been at least one day where the temperature changed 60 degrees in 24 hours, right? It's kind of insane. And so we have all 4 seasons and then some. It really is its own character. It really is something you have to work around. You can't just ignore it. And
But
so
then you can go ahead.
I was going to say thank you for your kind words, 'cause it is really important to me to make that in my stories.
And you can kind of channel it then. And you also know you can not only channel it from your experience, but also, again, just like it might be you, it is such a, and I don't want to be cliched about it, but it's such a character because you have no control over whether the next moment it's going to be black ice or
Right.
it's going to be a blizzard or it's going to be torrentially raining. That's out of your control.
Right, or flooding, or just it's out of your control. So you might have the best intentions, there might be urgency, but you've still got this antagonist keeping you from going where you need to go.
Exactly, that you can't control. I'm when I look over here, you all, I'm looking at the questions. I'm not distracted. I'm just looking at what all of you are saying. And Kathy Lanigan says, "Oh, Kathy, all right. So you might just want to skip to chapter 3 of this one." Kathy says, "I have a fear of being buried alive, and have had dreams about it." Very wise dream, but that is something that you could. I mean, I remember, oh my golly, this is just coming to light. Joe Finder wrote a novel about someone who was buried alive in a coffin. And he actually convinced a funeral director to let him get into a coffin and close it. And he said he lasted about no seconds.
Yeah.
It's like, not doing this. Why did you choose that particularly horrible
Right.
fate?
I had a collection of Tales from the Crypt comic books as a child. And I wasn't that dark of a child, but my parents took us to garage sales, and you'd have, $1, and you could buy a bunch of comic books for $1. And so I had this Tales from the Crypt one, and on the cover there was this. It was like a cutaway of a man buried alive. So you'd see him in the coffin, and then you saw the dirt, and then you saw somebody above just like rubbing their hands. And that image has stuck with me for decades. And I finally just got it out in this book.
I wonder if Kathy Lanigan read the same Tales from the Crypt.
And that's where she got
That's where she got the fear. That's where she got the fear. Renee is asking a great question, and she says, "How did Van and Harry get together?" Or is that part of the story that you don't want to tell?
Well, they were actually in the short story. So the one that preceded it, it's COVID, and they don't have 2 agents who are regular agents who can go to Costa Rica. So they sort of throw them together. And Harry's horrified because on the plane, Van eats potato chips and throws her bag on the floor. And she watches over somebody else's shoulder while they're reading. And he's just absolutely horrified by her poor manners. And I loved how he shows up as fussy but capable. And so I just brought him back for the next book.
I bet it's marvelous, and I love how you said that the story downloaded in your head, and I want to talk to you about that because I've had that happen once. I mean, I've written for a long time, but once it was just like whoop, and there it is.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about what that felt like and how you sort of recognized that it was a thing.
Yeah. And so with the short story, and again, I don't really know how to write them, but my understanding is you have to have this whole plot and character development in this tiny, tiny package. And so I got overwhelmed thinking about it. I've got my laptop, and all of a sudden I literally saw it like it was a movie, and I couldn't type fast enough. I'm just like, I got to get all this on paper before it leaves again. Like I saw her on the plane. I saw what it looked like when they're getting the luggage. I saw the woman they're tailing. I saw her face. I saw her daughter's face. And it was just this beautiful, tight, compact story. And I have this thing, even when I'm traveling, I carry marbles. And if I get a really good story idea, I put out a marble for the story fairies. And so I put out a great big glass marble for them. They have not visited since with such a good idea, but I'll still take that one.
Do you leave the marble?
I do. I put it in a garden somewhere. I just stick it outside in a garden somewhere.
I mean, it can't hurt, right? And maybe, it's the accumulation of the marbles gets to a critical mass. And then when you have left enough of them,
they come back around. Yeah. What was it like for you when you got that one time you got your idea?
I wrote it. I mean, I remember I was up on our third floor, and I was sitting a place where I don't usually sit, and I was sort of thinking about that I was trying to write a novel, and I didn't really know what it was, and I forget what it was that I thought, but I thought, oh yeah, yeah, and I had a notebook. I had a notebook and a pencil, and I wrote 4 pages of single spaced as fast as I possibly could. And my husband says, "What are you?" And I'm like, "Nope, nope, nope."
Yeah.
Because the interference with the wavelength is something that you don't want to have happen,
No.
right?
Yeah. No, it's real. It's real.
Even your own brain, that starts another track of, "Oh, I don't want to lose this." You don't want to have that track either.
No, you gotta write it down before something shiny comes along. My whole family knows you ask me if I get a different posture when I write. When I've got that idea that I have to get down, I do get all hunched up, and because you gotta get it out before it disappears.
I mean, I love Jonathan, and you all know I do. But sometimes I'll be writing, and I'll hear him walking behind me in the hall, and I'll think, "Don't come in here! Don't come
Don't
in
do
here!"
it. Don't.
Don't but we're all writers and we're all readers,
Yeah.
and we know that Vicky says never ignore the muse. That's right.
Cheers.
If she's coming, it's marvelous. Speaking of the muse, you just got back from leading a writing retreat in Italy. Talk a little bit about that and how you do those, and
Yeah.
when you go.
Yeah, I've been leading them for about 10 years, just because I want to travel and I love to teach. COVID sort of put a wrench in the works, but I got back to it about 2 years ago, and I hold them all over the world. This one was in Tuscany, and we rented this entire villa. There were 2 bedroom, 2 bathroom villas next to each other, and 20 women from all over the world flew to Tuscany, and we spent the week writing. And it was just some of them are better than others. These retreats, this one was the best I've ever been on. The women were amazing. The food wasn't always good, but it gave us something to complain about that wasn't teaching or writing. And the weather was beautiful. It was really transformative.
And what's the goal of them?
I have my whole teaching philosophy and my whole writing philosophy, which is what my TEDx talk is about, is that the best fiction is born of our personal experiences, and not necessarily one-to-one events, but more of those archetypal joyful moments, traumatic moments, fearful moments. And if we put them on paper in whatever disguise makes sense, that it resonates with the reader because it's true, it's authentic, right? There's something to it. And so the retreats are women who are writing mysteries. There's some romance writers, there's literary fiction writers, memoir writers, but they all approach it from that angle of mining their personal knowledge, emotions, experiences, and putting it into a book.
And I think it's so valuable of you to show people that your own experiences aren't what you don't put them directly into the book, but you use them as a seed for growing, for blossoming a new story.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's a perfect word. And do you know what? Most of the structure of this retreat is from our MWA University tour schedule, because it just starts out with, the orientation, and then there's character, there's setting. I do that pyramid on point method, right? I'm recycling everybody's knowledge.
I love that. I mean, I think that everything happens is the stepping stone for the next thing. So
So
I love that. I love that too. Have gone to Italy with you, even in my imagination. Next time, maybe for real. And where can readers and writers find out about your tours?
Yeah, so it's on my website. I have my next one is in Colorado. It's sold out, and then I'm taking a couple of years off because, knock on wood, my writing career is on fire, and I can only do one of those two things as much as I'd like to. So I'm choosing writing for a couple of years at least.
I mean, talk about buzz and talk about taking off. Every single one of your books has gotten more and more and more attention and more and more and more buzz. And every single one of the awards that has been that's offered in the writing world, your books are in them. I mean, what is that like to be so beloved and admired?
Well, I'm from Minnesota, so I can't take in any compliments, but I've been laboring at this for years, right? I've got over 20 books. My first one came out in 2006. And I'm proud of those books, right? I learned everything writing each of them, but it wasn't until Unspeakable Things, my 2020 book, was signed by Thomas and Mercer, who's my publisher now. I love them. When Jessica, my editor, signed me, she said, I don't care if only 45 people read this book. I love it. And every other publisher had turned it down, right? Everybody said, it won't work. It's a 12-year-old protagonist, but it's an adult mystery. It's in a flyover state. Nobody wants this. But she went to the mat for it. Her editing was brilliant, and it went on to sell over 300,000 copies. And so it's just Thomas and Mercer has been sort of my lucky penny, right? I get this wonderful editing, I get this wonderful marketing, and they're helping my weird little stories find their audience.
Jess, I think you are Thomas and Mercer's lucky penny. Let's just look at it that way. You're marvelous, and your book, The Taken Ones, is absolutely immersive and irresistible and so cinematic. When does the next one come out, if I could ask?
The next one comes out in a year from now, and this one's told from Harry's point of view. And when I was doing an interview for the Quarry Girls last year, the interviewer said in an offhand way, you know that in Minnesota you have a nursing home for serial killers, right? And I'm like, that was my face. I'm like,
thank you and goodbye.
Interview over. I've got some research and then writing to do. So in the second book, I fictionalized that, and that's the mystery is built around that. I'm very excited for that one too.
Is that really true?
It's really true. It's in this town called Faribault, which is about 45 minutes south of Minneapolis, and even more than it's. They retrofitted this old Gothic late 1800s like haunted looking institution and turned it into a prison. And in this prison, they have beds put aside for people who are immobile but very dangerous still. And it is true.
You know, they never make those places pretty, do they?
They don't. No, they don't. This place looks very haunted in real life.
I don't know if that's kind of a cycle. You are absolutely amazing, Jess Lourey. Let us spin the wheel of fun and see who will win a copy of The Taken Ones by Jess Lourey. If you've never seen the Wheel of Fun, you know, you are about to have an amazing time right now. So, Mark, we forgot to do questions, didn't we? That's why you're not spinning it. Okay, I get you, Margaret, in the back room is ESPing me. You did not take the questions. Got you. So let's put up a couple of questions. Thomas Shevlin says, hey, Thomas, has there ever been a time when you've been doing research and you've had the thought, am I now on a list? Or how long before the feds get here? Oh, yeah. I remember typing once, how long does it take to drown in salt water? And then I thought, ooh, no, maybe I don't want to put that up. What about you?
I typed, how can you poison the president of the United States? And then I just showed myself out. I'm like, it's all over for me. It was, of course, for a book, but it was Left Coast Crime was in Portland, Oregon, a conference in Portland, Oregon about 6 years ago. And there was an FBI tour that they led if you sign up for it. And I had one question during this tour. So there's like 40 mystery writers. I raised my hand. I said, are we all on a list somewhere? Like, you guys know about us. And he's like, oh, absolutely. And we did background checks before you came here. He said, but next to your names, we put mystery writer so that nobody looks at you too closely. And I'm like, well, that's like, if it is, it's licensed to do bad things because we've got cover.
Yeah, we have cover now. I know I took the FBI Citizens Academy several years ago, many years ago, and they asked for people to volunteer to try to beat the lie detector.
You did? Did you beat it? Yeah, you did.
Well, they were really angry with me because I didn't beat it. But at the end of the session where they asked me to, you know, they said, they asked me questions. Come on, Hank. They asked me questions that I had to answer truthfully and I had to lie. And they said that they could not tell the difference between the truth and the lie, that everything was inconclusive. So I thought, and then they were really mad. They were really unhappy with me. I mean, I was persona non grata for a while because I said, you said you wanted me to beat the lie detector. So I tried.
Yeah.
And they didn't want it to be that.
They probably should have studied you so that they could figure out how to.
I'm totally on the list. And I don't have an M by my name. You know, I'm just out there. Next time I put something up. That's a great question, Thomas. Thank you. Vicky says, what is the most challenging part of writing?
Whatever part I'm doing at that given moment. Do you know, I outline. Are you an outliner? No, you're a pantser. I'm an outliner. I love, sorry.
It's your agent.
Yeah, right. A movie deal. No.
Yeah.
I am an outliner. I love outlining. It's like scrapbooking, right? You can take all these fun things, sort of organize them, put them together. Um, for me, and I love editing. It's everything in between that is hard, that I'm challenged by. How about for you?
I love editing. The hardest part, the most challenging part is is having that one great idea that will hold up a novel.
Oh,
And once I get that, knock on wood, I'm kind of fine. I know how to persevere. I can do the beginning. I persevere through the middle. I barrel through the end. I adore the editing. I love to delete. I love to see what story I really meant to write. But, you can't do it until you have the thing.
so you have
And,
the first draft.
yeah.
I love
To the idea, just the idea that's going to, that gorgeous gem that nobody's ever written before in a way that nobody's ever written it before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the challenge. I love that both of us like to edit. I don't think that's true of a lot of writers.
Really? You think?
The people who I ask, a lot of them just really detest it, especially pantsers, especially people who don't outline, in my
Huh.
experience.
That's interesting. I love it. I wish I had an outline. You all who know me know that. I wish I had an outline. I just can't do it. But sometimes I'll write and think, well, this is not going to stay. This is going to go, and it's fine. I just go on because I can just take it out later. You can fix it later, is what I always say.
Yeah, you can fix it as long as you have that first draft. You can fix anything.
And this is suspenseful because Margaret in the background says, and since it's almost Halloween season, what was the favorite 80s candy?
Yeah, what was the favorite 80s candy? Do you know? So in my book, I have ring pops as their candy, but I remember in the 80s when the candy bar Score came out, SKOR. It's just a cheap Heath bar knockoff, but it was like the best thing I'd ever tasted.
You had an umlaut, right?
No, that's Skol. That's what you say at the Vikings football games, right? Skol. No, it was just poorly spelled, poorly made.
It was supposed to be like Haagen-Dazs, sort of made up.
Just an absolute made up word, yeah.
And do you remember that, or maybe this might have been the 60s, the 4 different kinds of chocolate things and
Yes, what was that called? And like a silver wrapper, wasn't it?
It had 4 attached chocolate. What were those called, you all? What were those things called? You'll tell us. You'll tell us. Somebody's going to know this in the comments. Let's take one last question that has nothing to do with candy. Vicky's saying, I love the marbles to the fairies. Yes, indeed, we do. I'm scrolling through the comments, so many. You said there is humor in this book.
There is humor in this book. So my first mysteries were the humorous Murder by Month mysteries, and I loved writing them, but I got away from the humor. I told myself lies. I told myself, you have to be serious to be taken seriously. And I just wanted to get back to the humor. And it isn't, Pratt Falls over the top sort of stuff. It's language humor. It's situational humor. And I really loved including it to balance the darkness.
I mean, it's witty and thoughtful, and it shows that characters are intelligent and think out of the box and have their own ideas, and their brains are working, and it makes them be real people. Someone says, Kathy Lanigan says,
Sky bar.
The Necco Sky Bar. It's the 4-in-1 bar.
Nice.
That's what that was. Nice. And I never ate the white one, the white with the white stuff.
No.
Stuff that you could never hear on any other show but Crime Time. Thank you all for your marvelous questions, and thank you all for we have so many candies coming out here. We love that. So let's spin the wheel of fun finally now. Thank you, Margaret. And we will draw for the winner. How do you like this?
This is so exciting.
Love the wheel of fun.
Oh my gosh. Woo, it is fun.
Sherry Robach, that is so great, Sherry. Congratulations, you lucky, lucky woman. And you will get some information about how to contact me, and then I will contact the producer, and the producer will contact Jess's publisher, and then Jess's publisher will get you the book. Just like this, The Taken Ones. Yeah. You lucky people. Also, if you are not Sherry Robach, you know what to do as soon as this show is over. Run to your favorite bookstore, click, and get The Taken Ones by Jess Lourey, and just have a candle by you. It's fun as well. It's fun and funny as well. Jess, thank you. It is so nice to see you.
It was my absolute pleasure. We were joking earlier that this is the only way you and I can catch up.
No, is by doing an interview. Well, that's fine. Absolutely, anytime. I am delighted. And congratulations on your mad, wild success. It
Thank
is.
you, and congratulations on your upcoming February release. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you. Go to your mailbox. It'll be there. You all, thank you so much for being here this afternoon. Next Tuesday at 4 p.m. ET, look at that really fabulous cover. Emily Critchley's One Puzzling Afternoon. And you know what I'm going to be doing this evening is reading this novel, One Puzzling Afternoon by Emily Critchley. We will see you here for that next Tuesday on Crime Time at 4 p.m. ET. Until then, remember, it is always safe inside a book. And we'll see you next time.